today is the lack of communicability of this particular section of the Penal Code, which can be attributed to being outdated as well as misinterpretable vocabulary. We, the opposition, see it as our duty to make this known to the government as an issue. By using phrases such as pseudo-photograph and negative as well as positive versions, a wall is put up around this code, blocking it from our young people to which this pertains. The youth do not understand these terms and as such do not know they may be breaking the law. Madam Speaker, by definition, the word pseudo-photograph is an image, whether made by computer graphics or otherwise, howsoever, which appears to be a photograph. Although the term pseudo-photograph can be applied regardless of what it depicts, in law, its meaning is especially relevant regarding child pornography. We see great value in using language which enhances the relevance. However, as this issue is one that victimizes young people and an offense committed by many uninformed young people, it should therefore be made more accessible by breaking out of the mold which only suits lawyers, making it more user-friendly en masse, if you will. This can be achieved by using words such as those used in Section 2256 of Title 18 of the United States Code, which uses phrasing as follows: any visual depiction of sexually explicit conduct involving a minor. Visual depictions include photographs, videos, digital or computer-generated images, and electronically stored data that can be converted into a visual image of child pornography is also deemed illegal under federal law. Madam Speaker, I would like to stress at this point the structure of this particular code as it communicates in a more streamlined and modern manner the same message which the government are trying but failing to express to the wider community. I therefore recommend that we look to the wording used by the USA, particularly its use of the term visual depiction. We therefore propose that the government use words which either broaden the understanding, such as visual depiction, to replace both pseudo-photograph and negative as well as positive versions, or alternatively, target the specifics by using words such as computer-generated image to replace pseudo-photograph and photograph to replace negative as well as positive versions. Madam Speaker, I further my point that the government is not succeeding in keeping up to speed with the new generation, which this law pertains to. While some laws fade into irrelevance, some rise up to serve a more desperate purpose. You as a government are responsible for creating laws, but also amending ones which lack tangibility to be handed down to each descending generation. Madam Speaker, I can guarantee you that as a youth parliament, some members present today have no idea what a negative or positive version is. And I know for a fact that my younger brother would be completely unfamiliar with this term, as he was born and grew up in a world where film cameras that use physical film had practically vanished off the market. So how is it that we are to hand the younger generation a law which affects them and pertains to them with language unfamiliar and in some cases foreign to them?
Sorry, remember you have 1 minute remaining.
As the current sentence lies at 15 years of imprisonment, which is in fact in line with those of other great nations, such as Great Britain and the US, Madam Speaker, we feel that the government are doing both the inmate and community a disservice if we do not develop or enhance incarceration period to mirror that of a sex offender. What the opposition is proposing today is to alter the dynamic of the incarceration period so that it is more effective for both the convicted and the affected community by being more proactive in terms of providing courses and support in prison. Madam Speaker, before my colleagues expand on these points, I would urge the government to approve this motion. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the Honorable Premier. I recognize the third elected member for Bordentown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In today's society, mental illness is a hugely debated topic in the world of criminal justice. In discussing the fact of child pornography, there are many layers to the issue taking place, such as drugs and alcohol, and more importantly, mental state. In the motion to the amendment of Section 228A of Penal Code regarding child pornography, we as the opposition impose that once the perpetrator is incarcerated, they're obligated to undergo psychiatric analysis during their sentence. Currently, inmates have access to forms of support, but are in need of a stronger system in place. Madam Speaker, today I would like to focus on the impact of pornography on the brain and the importance of carrying out such analysis, as well as learning the psychological impact of pornography on the brain and the effects of why we need to impose such analysis. Madam Speaker, local behavioral health specialists employed at the Cayman Islands Prison Service observed that our brains react to pornography the same way an alcoholic might react to seeing a drink advertisement. Researchers believe that pornography creates an intense brain stimulation that has the same brain changes and effects, such as that to a drug addiction, according to the information from the Enough is Enough website statistics. A Northwood Prison psychiatric representative has given us an outline on the current existing systems in place. The representative reported that the prison currently has a low population in crimes related to porn, which would make this an easy task to impose such rulings. However, it was also mentioned that the prison does not have a full-time psychiatrist other than the one. Madam Speaker, to an area of attention, we know that there are 2 6-month-long programs in which rotate January to June and July to December. These programs are based on cognitive therapy, where men are asked to talk about themselves, the actions they've committed, while also using things such as role play in order to help them understand what they've done. It was brought to our attention that each prisoner, upon their arrival, undergoes 2 mandatory risk assessments, and based on their crime and then assessment results, the terms and conditions of their release are formulated based on their risk to the community. The behavioral health issue program offered relies voluntarily on the participation of the sex offenders. However, as the opposition, we pose to enforce that they take part, as currently it is mandatory for 60% of the sentence to be served before release, quoted from the Northwood Prison representative. As we feel that if a person is sentenced to the maximum of 15 years, they should not be released after 9 years of sitting, being content with themselves, and receiving 3 meals a day. Madam Speaker, we also feel that it would be beneficial to involve the Georgetown Mental Health Unit in order to provide some form of counseling support to these men or women that are put back into society alone, creating the ability that someone within the society will be able to monitor them and alert if anything should arise. The fact is, like exercise and the consumption of food, pornographic material floods the brain with dopamine, making a person feel good generally. Over time, the chemical begins to rewire the brain's reward pathway, which then begins to alter the makeup of the viewer's mind. This eventually leading to the insatiable appetite for porn, and thus a new internet predator and threat to your child is born. Madam Speaker, in the recent Cayman Compass article dated October 4, 2016, entitled "Man Jailed for 16 Months for Possession of Child Pornography," we hear the story in the article to be described as the first of its kind in Cayman, as previous cases had the defendant sentenced to indecent assault, with each man sentenced for possession of child pornography concurrent. The story is that a man admitted to the possession of 10 videos featuring sexual activity involving children who appeared to be between the ages of 8 and 14. Although he pleaded guilty for admission, the magistrate gave him a sentence of 16 months. Madam Speaker, if I may, this is like saying it's okay if someone committed a murder just because he confessed to it. There is no doubt that child pornography is on the rise, and we need to begin to protect our community, but most importantly, our children. If it were your child, would you be okay? Their predator in prison, content for an easy 16 months, after which then they're thrown back into society? I would like to make it clear that I'm not suggesting all persons convicted of this crime have mental issues, but I do believe in the alignment with scientific studies done. When such actions are carried out, the brain is affected in some way. As the opposition, we find it important to voice the concerns of our country in regarding to protecting its children. So think, as a parent, older brother or sister, with a conscience and stable morals, do you think it's okay for someone to be convicted for such a crime, staying in prison for a short amount of time and being released back into society as virtually the same person who entered the prison? The simple answer should be no. Madam Speaker, I leave you with the facts and real and relevant scenarios, stressing what the government is doing now is virtually nothing, and what they're doing is for the sake in upholding legal customs. With that, I restate my colleagues' urge for the government to move this motion. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before I begin, I would just like to address some of the points of the opposition, and I'm going to try to do this as respectfully as possible while also recalling what they said. If I'm not mistaken, the Leader of the Opposition mentioned that the wording of the law, as it is currently, it can be confusing to children or young persons that may be breaking the law unknowingly. I would like to simply ask if she thinks that the general young person or the general child is reading the Penal Code of the Cayman Islands. Moving on, I would like to mention what the third elected member of Boddentown said, that people who serve, say, I can't remember exactly the year she gave, I think it was 11 years, and got out in 9 or something like that. That is part of a law that was passed last year with early release. After serving 60%, you can be called, I think it's called up to a parole board of some sort, and they will look at you and decide whether you are eligible for early release. So it's not that there's some problem with the law that allows them to get out early. It's specifically there was a law created to allow them to be released.
Madam Speaker, on a point of order.
What is your point of order?
I would like to ask the Honorable Premier if he thinks that there is any value in preparing the law in an updated manner for the people that are upcoming in the society. I would also like to ask him if he owns a camera that uses physical film. I wonder why we should keep outdated information in our law, because it just leaves more loopholes for people to say, well, I didn't have pornographic pictures of a child on a camera that existed 20 years ago, so it's fine.
First of all, I do think that the laws should be changed in accordance with the times, because laws are supposed to be, well, at least the Constitution at least is a living document, and I think the laws should follow suit. But in her second question, I think that the law as it is sufficiently, it currently fills it fills everything that we need to cover all areas. It includes negatives and positives, and while the wording may not be exactly like the US Constitution, as she pointed out, it is sufficient for us here. Continuing, I would like to point out...
Madam Speaker, may I have a point of clarification?
Does the Honorable Premier give way to the Honorable Leader of Opposition?
No, thank you. Continuing, the third elected member of Boddentown mentioned an article in, I can't remember, it's not important, but the sentence of a case of anyone of any crime, if found guilty, is left to the discretion of the judge. It does not indicate any fault in the law, that the judge used his purview to decide that that was the appropriate amount of punishment for that person. So it doesn't indicate a fault specifically in the Penal Code. Now, continuing to my actual
Madam
speech.
Speaker, may I have a point of clarification? On a point of order.
What is your point of order?
I would like to state that what my colleague described was not an issue with the conclusion that was given through the law. And I wonder where you heard that we were questioning the sentence given. What our motion is proposing is to whatever time period the judge deems responsible enough for the perpetrator to be in prison, that it's used effectively. And the problem we see is that someone who has caused a minor great distress went to prison for whatever amount of time, but did not receive the attention that they should have, to leave the prison a better person.
I would also like to point out again that this is all left at the discretion of the courts, and it does not immediately indicate a fault in the law. Now, continuing. The motion being discussed is pertaining to the Penal Code and the punishment and post-release terms of those convicted of possession of imagery or videography that portray children in an indecent nature. This is a sensitive topic, if only due to the presentation of professional opinion, to the social stigma attached to the abuse of children. And although it may seem like a good idea initially due to the presentation of professional opinion, it may not seem as rational later on. The government will always support legal reform and reform of the Penal Code if the suggestions are rational and necessary. But in the case of this motion and the information that has been gathered and presented by the members of the government, we do not see that it is justified in its actions. Although this is no defense of those—
Madam Speaker, on a point of order.
What is your point of order?
Can the Honorable Premier please specify which particular sections of our motion he deems irrational?
If the Honorable Leader of the Opposition would let me read my speech, I just might. Continuing. Although this is no defense of those who are proven guilty of these actions, we cannot justify in our minds these types of draconian punishments. The law is relatively clear, using terms that shouldn't be considered misleading or that can be easily misinterpreted if read in the proper context, in the government's opinion.
Madam Speaker, on a point of order, please.
What is your point of order?
I must question the Premier as to whether he thinks that mental health testings to help evaluate a person's mental well-being is described as draconian, as he has said, as our proposition is. The question is whether he considers mental testing to help evaluate a person's mental capabilities to be draconian, as he has stated that our proposal change to the Penal Code is, quote, draconian. So I'm questioning.
I did not specify in my speech what punishment I was referring to when I said draconian, and the Leader of the Opposition continues to create alternative facts. But anyway, currently the limit for this specific offense is 15 years in the Penal Code, which is in my sight and the sight of the government more than enough time for—
Madam Speaker, on a point of order,
What is your point of order?
the Premier still has not stated the question as to what he found in our proposal to be draconian. He has simply stated that he has simply continued saying that we continue with quote-unquote alternative facts, but has not yet even answered the question as to what specific part of our proposal he considered to be draconian.
I shall continue. I think that specifically in your motion, having a curfew of 7 o'clock, assuming that someone has a drug problem or an alcohol problem, which is a drug—
Madam Speaker, on a point of order.
What is your point of order?
I ask why you think that is unreasonable. In our motion, we state that drug and alcohol testing should be implemented if necessary. It says if necessary in our motion. That if necessary means that if drugs or alcohol was a factor in convicting the person of that crime, then it would be necessary afterwards to test for drug and alcohol. The curfew of 7 o'clock is for the sole reason that after 7 o'clock, many teenagers are out of the house, out and about. And like my colleague said in her speech, as pornography is an addiction, someone with that addiction would react in the same way as seeing an alcohol advertisement on the TV if they saw a 16-year-old girl a pretty 16-year-old girl out and about, and would make them more prone to take part in illegal activities afterward.
I'm not sure if that was a question or not, and I don't think it was, so I'm just going to continue. And furthermore, what the opposition is referring to when they say, quote, a more appropriate and effective incarceration period, end quote. I would assume that that means a longer sentence, simply because As the opposition loves pointing out, it's vague, but a mandatory minimum sentence is what they could be referring to, maybe a raised maximum sentence, but in that case, what is appropriate? 15 isn't, so 20 is, 15 isn't, so 25, 30, where
Madam
does...
Speaker, on a point of order.
This is...
Although the Honorable Premier has a lot to say underneath his breath, I ask that he answers my question this time. And my question is, where in our motion do we state that we want to extend the sentence?
I clearly said that that is what I interpreted from what you have in your motion. I didn't say it was verbatim in your motion. So I don't know what you want. But anyway, the law currently allows for both leniency and a lengthy sentence at the court's discretion. This is clearly just the result of social stigma and radical ideologies currently present in this very chamber. This is an arbitrary attempt to raise unnecessarily the limit for sentencing of this offense, in my opinion. Going back to the quote from the motion, who decides what is, quote, a more appropriate and effective incarceration period? There is no valid universal standard for this kind of sentencing, and in the opinion of the government, it should be left up to the courts and mental professionals to be decided on a case-by-case basis, due to the complexities of each case. According to Ms. Nina Welsh, the current HCPC registered forensic psychologist at Northwood Prison, responsible for rehabilitation of violent offenders and sex offenders, anyone recommended to her by a judge can receive treatment. According to the professional opinion of Ms. Welsh, quote, there is no proven link between mental health and sex offenders or sexual offenses, which from my understanding means that the very professional who would be giving the psychiatric analysis and regular support during the incarceration period does not think that it should be a blanket treatment. In fact, according to Ms. Welsh, instead of making treatment mandatory, we should, quote, focus on treating those who are at high risk of reoffending and are capable of response during said treatments. When someone is released and they have served their time, they have repaid their debt to society and should not be isolated socially. Normal people can stay outside past 7 p.m. Normal people can have a drink if they so choose. These types of restrictions post-release will cause a higher chance or likelihood of reoffending. We should be focusing on treatments in the community centered on friends, family, and coworkers to ensure the lowest chance of reoffending. The government is focusing on rehabilitation to ensure that when prisoners are released, they can become functioning, productive members of society. It is our priority to ensure everyone meets the requirements of their rehabilitation programs and can be monitored safely with the least amount of social isolation and stigma when released. In conclusion, we support legal reform of the penal code, but this motion is taking unnecessary steps in the wrong direction. The law is relatively clear and concise, using terms that can be understood by readers when taken into context. There is no valid and scientific connection between mental health issues and sexual offenders, as this motion seems to indicate. The current sentencing regulations allow for both leniency and harsh punishments at the discretion of the courts, and treatment needs to be concentrated on the high-risk offenders according to professional opinion. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the Honorable Minister of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, and Housing and Infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Firstly, in the majority of the first world countries, their take on child pornography is that the problem should not be fixed but prevented. There are facilities that deal with persons who feel the urge to download and upload pornographic pictures of children for unethical purposes. Why can't we take the lead in this area like we always have? I would like to state that the focus should not be on after the damage is done and the pictures have already been uploaded. At that point, there's nothing you can do for the person who the image was taken of. The focus should be laid on before the pictures were uploaded. There are many ways that the online distribution of child pornography can be prevented in schools and in the community. The first way is by educating students and adults on the consequences and negative outcomes of being in possession of child pornography. And the second way is to have it be made aware on social media, because as we all know, teens spend hours upon hours on their phones, and even if they won't listen to the first point, like the other age groups, constantly seeing the consequences on their mobile devices will surely have it stick in their heads. Madam Speaker, The government has many other problems to dwell with rather than spending thousands of dollars on drug tests and checkups on the offender. That money can be put outwards to more crucial problems like funding scholarships, the new John Gray High School. The list can go on and on. The focus needs to be on the prevention. However, I have to acknowledge that prevention is not always possible, and there will be offenders. I am not of the belief that there is a need for prolonged drug testing after the offender has been rehabilitated. The altered state of mind of the accused should be taken into account. If anything, the convicted should have counseling and treatment with respect to drug usage and addiction once this was a contributing factor to their pornographic consumption. Instead of constant probation, which is not possible, the probation officer should have a close relationship with the convict's family and friends so that they can be an influence into their treatment. Madam Speaker, this problem doesn't occur frequently enough for there to be an actual valid reason as to why the laws should be changed. At best, it's usually a teenage group of boys and girls with naked pictures that have been sent around school. And if that is the issue, then the problem should be in the school. The existing rules and consequences at the school should be evaluated and improved and enforced. If there were to be a full investigation of pictures and videos of underage children, then the majority of students in any given school would have to be expelled, or even worse. Thus, the punishment should be treated and their actions dealt with at different degrees, depending on the severity of the crime. A 16-year-old shouldn't have been sent to jail for 15 years with constant probation and drug tests for nudes from their boyfriend and girlfriend. But at the same time, a 35-year-old man with a large stockpile...
Madam Speaker, on a point of order.
What is your point of order?
I ask if the member understands that someone who is 16 years old cannot be trialed in adult prison for a maximum of 15 years.
Okay, well, sorry, but I was just stating, I was just giving an example, and that is my opinion. And last time I checked, I'm entitled to that. Can I continue?
Continue, member.
The crime can vary, and the law should be able to take into consideration all of these aspects, and the punishment should be handed out accordingly, which is what you were saying. Am I right?
No talking across.
Oh. In conclusion, child pornography is a problem that needs to be prevented. The government has more pressing issues to deal with. This problem does not transpire enough, and the issue needs to be looked at from different perspectives of each age group so that the matter can be dealt with appropriately. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the elected member for East End.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, I would like to share with the House that we are proposing that curfew and monthly drug and alcohol testing are part of conditions under which an offender is released from prison. Madam Speaker, right now in the Cayman Islands, we don't have curfew and drug and alcohol testing. We are not saying that this is going to change this at once, but this is to make sure there are no possibilities to get pornographic material. Now, in regards to curfew, we, the opposition, have a curfew for the offender from 7 o'clock till 5:30 a.m. every day until the probationary period is over, in order for everyone who has been damaged already and those who haven't to be saved. A random check should be put in place on the offender.
Madam Speaker, on a point of order.
What is your point of order?
A 7 o'clock curfew isn't going to stop someone from going on to a phone and accessing photos.
Member, I would like for you to let me finish my sentence. Thank you.
That's not a question.
May I continue?
Point of
Continue,
order.
member. What is your point of order?
It's clearly not stated in the motion that it's extended from 7 o'clock to 5:30 a.m.
Again.
Where is that stated?
Oh.
So, if we didn't put that in the motion, should it just stay till 7 and then anytime? That's why I'm talking about this, so please, can you let me finish?
Point of order, that doesn't answer my question. I asked you, where is it stated in the motion?
As you can read, it's not in the motion. That's why I'm saying it right now. A random check should be put in place on the offender by an officer to ensure that the offender is obeying their punishment. We want the government to keep everyone safe from someone who has already caused damage in the society and who can do it again after imprisonment. The offender will be restricted from working in places that relate to children, such as schools, hospitals, public places for entertainment, and public parks, so that all children will be safe. As well, they will be restricted with their use of technology, internet, and social media. The purpose of this curfew is to keep children, families, communities, societies safe. Madam Speaker, I personally believe that after imprisonment, they might still not understand the implications for a child's future, knowing that their pornographic materials are going around. Some of them send indecent pictures to their partners when they are under the age of 18, but once they realize the images start going around, they will start thinking of what they did wrong. And that person who got the pornographic material, they will send them to friends and family members, and all of them then will be blamed for having those pornographic images. That's the reason the perpetrator must have a curfew to ensure that he or she is inside and away from the road, bars, and places where it will be easy for them to stay out of trouble, and so that they can stay away from temptation of wanting to get any other type of pornographic images. Now, you may ask, why is the curfew 7 o'clock? And the answer to that is that most of the young people goes out at 7 p.m., as we all know. So it's the perfect time of the day for the perpetrator to find temptation. Since they won't be able to have any access to internet or social media, the only source they will have be going out at the time to look at every young lady, including your own sisters, yourself, or cousins, daughter, or even close friends, who just went, for example, to watch a movie or for an ice cream, and without them knowing, they are being watched differently by the perpetrator. Madam Speaker, if the person doesn't obey the curfew and is found outside their house after 7 o'clock, they will be taken back to court to face an additional sentence and finish their sentence, in case they were released before their sentence is over. Or they will have to go back to court, and he or she will be put back in jail because the offender is not trustworthy until they are finished the new sentence. Even though we don't know exactly when, how, or where they got the pornographic material, we want the curfew to ensure that they will be at home after 7 o'clock. It will be easy for all of us to know where they are, and it will be easy to track them. Madam Speaker, what if it was your daughter, and if she went on a weekend or even on a weekday, and there is someone taking images of them? It doesn't have to be your daughter. It can be your niece or your sister. Madam Speaker, that's why we want the perpetrator to have a curfew to protect our society, our youth, and especially our own families. Madam Speaker, now I want to talk about drug and alcohol tests. Drugs might not be the reason for the perpetrator.
Madam Speaker, point of order.
Point of order denied. There's too much excessive point of orders now.
Thank you, Madam
Please be
Speaker.
seated. Thank you.
Drugs might not be the reason for the perpetrator to watch or have in possession the pornographic material, but this will be for those who were affected by drugs, and after using the drugs, they were tempted to have such things with them.
Member, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, we want to impose a drug and alcohol test after imprisonment to ensure that the person who is sending pornographic images or have them in possession is not being controlled by any type of narcotic drugs that are affecting the person's brain and making them have different points of view about respect to others. Drug and alcohol tests will be done every month to ensure that the offender is not taking any types of drugs that are not prescribed. These tests and drugs will be for those who needs it, who went to jail because they were using them. Madam Speaker, I am asking the government to pass this motion in order to protect our society and help all those who has been struggling to abstain from this type of media. We need to make this amendment to have a safer society and a better future. And then we will know that we are doing the right thing to protect our children. We know that this will make a change and will help everyone who has this type of indecent materials to learn mutual respect and the importance of this respect. We are trying to teach everyone from a young age to keep biblical principles and to make a change to this society and to help the internet world be more useful for the right things and not used for this type of indecent materials. Remember this quote before saying aye or no. You, as much as anyone in this universe, deserve your love and your respect. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the second elected member for Cayman Rock and Little Cayman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the present law provides that a person who is found in possession of child pornography can be sentenced to 15 years in prison. Now, the opposition wants to add probation to the existing law. Haven't the offender been punished enough? What's the sense of the 15 years if they're going to be punished after they get out as well? Madam Speaker, this has way too much negative impact on the individual because there is no physical link between the offender and the child since he didn't directly commit the crime compared to the person that took the picture of the child. Madam Speaker, honestly, I think it is completely unnecessary that the opposition feels the need to go overboard with this punishment simply to bring forward justice. The motion brought forward has stated that
Madam
the government...
Speaker, may I have a point of clarification?
Does the member, Honorable, the second elected member for Cayman Rock and Little Cayman give way to the Honorable?
No, thank you. The motion brought forward has stated that the government considers introducing a more appropriate and effective custody period to the perpetrators where they are giving a temporary probation that should involve a curfew at 7 o'clock, monthly drug and alcohol testing if necessary, as well as monthly mental support checkups for a specific period of time. Madam Speaker, I find so many problems with this motion as it has many significant flaws. For one, it infringes on aspects of human rights, such as the right to freedom from interference with privacy, family, and home. The other issue I find is wrong with this motion is the recommendation of a monthly drug and alcohol test. This I find unacceptable to the offender's situation. I think that this is not related to the offense because it is implying that the perpetrator's behavior is influenced by abusing drugs or alcohol misuse. Madam Speaker, now I understand that offenders shouldn't be dealt with lightly. That's a fact. But is it really necessary to mandate probation after the 15-year sentence? I mean, let's think about it for a second. The individual returns back to his home or family, right? Now, once he is settled, the probation begins, and the first rule to abide by is a 7 o'clock curfew. Now, instead of him feeling free and relieved from the horrific things he experienced in prison, he has to continue living the nightmare on probation as if he never left. Madam Speaker, if we took away the offender's freedom of rights, what would it accomplish? Absolutely nothing. Additionally, what does that say about us? That we honestly believe that locking criminals away from the real world, even after they've served their time in prison, will reduce child pornography? I don't think so. Madam Speaker, I will return to the issue of having the drug and alcohol testing monthly. Is the opposition implying that only people that use these substances are sex offenders or are likely to commit a sexual offense? Madam Speaker, even those that aren't consuming these substances sometimes get caught or accused of committing such a crime. So what exactly would a drug test prove then about the individual? Nothing. Madam Speaker, I realize you want to keep our society safe, but do we really need this? I think not. Madam Speaker, in closing, I will end by saying that I strongly disagree with this added probation because it takes away the offender's freedom of rights to where they feel trapped or held captive. Also, the use of alcohol and drugs won't predict if you're a sex offender or not. Madam Speaker, allow me to suggest instead that during the 15-year incarceration, the authorities and agencies do everything possible to rehabilitate the perpetrator or extend the sentencing years, rather than making ruthless demands after incarceration. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the 5th elected member for Georgetown. Based on the program, it's you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to speak on the education of the public, more specifically children, on these laws in the Penal Code. As many are unaware of what these entitle, and that many that are being accused and convicted of these actions are unaware at their time of conviction that what they were doing is against the law. But allow me to explain. A percentage of child pornography cases that are proven guilty are from teenagers and adolescents that are creating these images of themselves or other people and sharing them, usually online. This is happening because they are unaware that what they're doing is illegal and that it goes against the penal codes. A recent study done by the Associated Press found that 1 in 10 teenagers have taken a sexual image of themselves, and 3 in 10 have received an image of themselves or shared them. These show that this is a rising problem, whether we know about it or not, and that if we don't do something about it soon, it will become a major problem in the Cayman Islands. As stated in the Ministry of Education Sex and Relationship Education Policy, sexual education in the Cayman Islands does not include any teaching on the legality or illegality of these actions, or moreover the morality of these actions that these teenagers are committing, sometimes even on a daily basis. And I believe that it would be in the best interest to adjust this policy in order to incorporate teachings on safety around online sexuality in order to stop these cases from happening. Also, according to the United Kingdom Sex and Relationship Education curriculum, teachings of online sexual safety are not included, and this also arises a problem for the coming up children of our years, because if they are not well educated on these topics, they will not know that these are illegal. And as they come up and start to raise their own families, they will not pass down this information, meaning that a whole new generation will be unaware that these actions are immoral and illegal. Also, the education should not just stop at these children, because there are adults and older people out there that also do not know of these laws and that this is happening. So the initiative should be taken to the wider public in order to educate everyone about the penal code. As we all know, Cayman is a very small island, and when any instance of breaking the law of any kind happens, more than just the criminal know about it. So if an instance of child pornography that breaks this penal code were to happen, more than just the victim and the perpetrator would know about it, but yet these cases remain unreported. I ask why that is. It's because people are not educated on these laws and either the illegality or the extent of the illegality of these people's actions. So in order to increase the percentage of reported cases, I believe that it is needed to educate everyone on these laws. And the education of these laws could be as simple as bringing people into the schools to educate our children about how their conduct is not in accordance to the law, and as well as preventing kids that are thinking maybe about starting to do these kind of acts from starting them in the first place. Because, as you all know, prevention is better than cure. These speakers could always take this to the wider community as well to educate everyone about these laws in order to stop these things from happening. And also, I believe that details in the law should be placed online in a more easy to understand manner than it is written in the penal code, as the penal code itself is not the easiest thing to understand for everyday readers. I know when I read it, I had to take back and read it again to see if it actually made sense. Because some of the words and phrases in the penal code section 228, specifically A, are really difficult to understand, and it also uses terms that are no longer taught or used in society, such as negative and positive photographs and pseudo-photographs. And I believe that this stops the law from being taught throughout the school system and throughout the island, as not a lot of people would be able to understand that what these laws even entitles, even if you went around telling them about it. So they would leave these programs just the same as they were before, with no knowledge of these laws whatsoever. In conclusion, I feel as if the education of the public is essential to the reduction or maybe even the eradication of these cases that happen throughout the island, and that the government should consider moving forward with it. Also, the adjustment of the wording of the law would be a great aid in the enforcement and would make the public more knowledgeable and more mindful of it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the Honorable Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to express my opinion on this motion before this Honourable Youth Parliament. So, as a member of the opposition stated, it would be extremely helpful to teach the penal code to students in schools. Although, if they are being taught the penal code, there's no need to actually amend the penal code, because the teachers who are teaching it to them should have the English knowledge to be able to teach it to them by adjusting the words themselves to make it easier for the students to understand. The motion claims that the wording of the specific sections of this law are unclear. First of these sections is 228A, subsection 3A, parts 1 and 2. Sections read as follows. For the purpose of the subsection A, references to a photograph include the negative as well as the positive version, and data stored on a computer disk or by other electronic means which are capable of conversion into a photograph. Part 1 refers to the use of film cameras in film imaging, where negative refers to the raw film from a camera and positive refers to the developed image. These are standard terms, and I have consulted with photographers, and they say they wouldn't recommend changing this to any other terms because any other term could be misleading or misinterpreted. And the context in this setting is fairly clear. The leader of the opposition also asked the Premier if he owned a film camera. I'm not sure whether he owns one, but I personally do own a film camera. The next of these subsections is B, part 2. Data stored on a computer disk or any other electronic means which are capable of conversion into pseudo-photograph. Pseudo-photograph has been defined as an image, whether made or produced by computer graphics or other ways, which appears to be a photograph. This is, of course, referring to the possession of images that have been edited by a computer program or manually in the case of film photography. This includes animation software, for example, drawing it yourself on a graphical tablet or animating it, including explicit comic novel, or any other image that portrays children in a sexually explicit manner. And the word pseudo is fairly popular in the English language, and it's fairly easy to understand. They'd also mentioned that the United States law is slightly different in its wording. It also does include the use of computer-generated images, and here it says images produced by computer graphics, which is essentially the same thing. And we shouldn't use other countries' laws as a basis to write our own. This law has been working so far. Subsections C and D have also been mentioned among the passages to amend, and it reads as follows. References to an indecent film photograph include an indecent film, copy of an indecent film, and indecent photograph comprised in a film. And subsection D is photographs, including those comprised in a film, shall, if they show children and are indecent, be treated as indecent photographs of children, and so respects pseudo-photographs. This passage further defines a photograph as not only an image, but also a film or video. The passage classifies any film with indecent images as child pornography, which is, I think, fairly obvious. And this applies to all copies of the film. For example, if it's circulated in the form of either if it's being sent to people through some sort of cloud system or in the form of DVDs or flash drives or just shared on social media. And passage D is referring to the use of sexually explicit animation films, which is considered a major problem outside, but as far as what we've seen in the news, it doesn't seem to be an issue here. So the final amendment requested is for section 2288A, subsection 4. And it reads as follows. If the impression conveyed by a pseudo-photograph is that the person shown is a child, the pseudo-photograph shall be treated for the purposes of this section as showing a child, and so shall a pseudo-photograph where the predominant impression conveyed is that the person shown is a child, notwithstanding that some of the physical characteristics shown are those of an adult. The law is very concise in this bit here, as it bans the use of a photo of an adult that's being portrayed or altered through some form of plastic surgery, or the film or the raw video itself has been edited to make them look like a child. And same in the case of photographs. And it essentially just classifies it as child pornography. So this law, to some extent, applies to adults being portrayed as children as well. And the government is in unanimous accordance with myself when I say that the law is concise, and any changes to it will bring about gray areas and opportunities to exploit the law. And The government and the Attorney General's office do not find any need to make amendments to the penal code, as the current penal code serves its purpose well, and changing it will do nothing but put extra strain on the Attorney General's office. I would like to conclude by adding that the law is present to be as accurate and concise as possible, and while the public should be able to access and understand this law, detailed and specific language and wording is necessary, as with this, the legal practitioners of the Cayman Islands can represent and protect the people, and we, as the representatives of the people, must work towards this goal. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the Honorable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before I start, Madam Speaker, I would just like to state that the fifth elected member of Georgetown stated that the amendment section 228A of Penal Code, child pornography, is a bit hard to understand, but as stated in the Cayman Islands Bill for a law to amend the Penal Code to penalize activities relating to child pornography, it clearly states that it makes it an offense to be in possession of an indecent photograph of a child, which, Madam Speaker, I think is self-explanatory for anyone reading this code and understanding. As seeing what the opposition has requested the government to consider, I believe that this matter should be dealt with in a more appropriate manner. I believe what the opposition is requesting is a bit extreme due to the conditions they want to enable after the offender has served his or her time in prison and getting ready to leave. Let's look at the 7 o'clock curfew they have requested, for example. This doesn't, by any chance, limit the offender from still participating in child pornography in any way possible. They'll still be allowed to gain access to videos, photos, and social media sites to pose as teens, predators, and target younger children. Requesting a 7 o'clock curfew is highly unnecessary and absurd, as it doesn't benefit the offender and it doesn't allow for proper rehabilitation. The next point I would like to address is the alcohol and drug testing. For offenders sentenced for child pornography, quote unquote, this request could be described as pointless. Because the offender was arrested for only having indecent photos or videos of children, it's not necessary for the offender to be drug and alcohol tested, for they weren't arrested for that offense. It's not like it was stated that the offenders were addicted to narcotics while they had possession of those photos and videos. A visible explanation could be that they enjoy indecent photos from younger children, just as an adult would of any gender in that way as well. Clearly not saying that it is rightful for them to possess, but when we look at it, drug and alcohol testing monthly would be a complete waste of money, time, and use of resources. Lastly, I would like to address the last request made from the opposition, which is stating that they would like a monthly mental support checkup for a specific period of time for the offender. This brings me back to the point where I say this method, after the offender no longer being in custody, is redundant. Psychiatric help is implying that the offender has a mental problem just because they were in possession of these indecent photos or videos of children. We all need to look at the main issue that certain offenders may have these images or videos without even knowing, and if they did have them on purpose, doesn't necessarily mean so much time and the use of resources should go into assessing them for psychiatric help. Some offenders may change within the course of doing their time in prison and may have viewed this crime they have committed as a phase. Research in the Northern District of Ohio shows an example of an offender, Ryan Collins, a child pornography defendant who was found guilty for having 19 videos and 93 still images on his computer. The jury recommended an average of 14-month sentence. Justice Gwynne then sentenced Collins to serve 5 years, longer than the jury recommendation, yet significantly shorter than the government's 20-year recommendation. As you can see, after Mr. Collins' time in prison, he was let go and given the opportunity for starting his life back again the right way. Rehabilitation methods were recommended for Mr. Collins, and he was successful through every session, and this was without a curfew or without harsh punishments given to him after his offense. Another example would be Tayak's client, Richard Bisline, a Mount Vernon man who pleaded guilty to knowingly possessing 305 images and 56 videos of child pornography on his computer. A 67-year-old stroke victim with hearing loss who was responsible for his wife's care. Bisline admitted to federal agents that he downloaded the images through a pt2 program, which is a program that many children and many teens and adults as well, and offenders can gain access from here as well as research. According to many court records, many showed girls between the ages of 8 and 10 being raped by adult men. If prosecutors think that a child pornography defendant's mental health contributed to the crime and that the individual is sincere about rehabilitation and is not a child predator, they will agree to diminished incarceration plea arguments, says Raymond Kasser, a Farmington Hill, Michigan defense lawyer. The government doesn't really believe that treatment can help most of these people, Kasser says, adding the courts are getting to get that sense as well. In closing, I would like to say, Madam Speaker, that we all want to look out for the safekeeping of our children as well as creating a safe environment free from these perpetrators. Not only is the government trying to keep children safe, but we look to provide rehabilitation to violent offenders and sex offenders to ensure that they can be productive, healthy members of society. It's not merely being said that these amendments are redundant, but they are in fact a bit too extreme, and we should go about handling this situation in a way that will not only endure for a short period, but long term, where the situation is substantial and can remain strong and ongoing for the betterment of our country, community, and younger children. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the Honorable Minister of Financial Service, Commerce and Environment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to it was previously stated by the 5th elected member for East End that the perpetrator should be given a curfew of 7 o'clock. Most children get out of school at 3 o'clock. Therefore, are you initially stating that a child cannot be sexually harmed between the time period of 3 and 6? Continuing, I am in agreement with the views that my honorable colleagues have put forward, thus on the motion moved by the Leader of the Opposition. I would, however, like to suggest some amendments to the current motion to make it more acceptable for the government party. Madam Speaker, my suggestion would be to replace the recommended alcohol and drug testing with a ban on the perpetrator from entering a school zone. This would be more relevant than a drug and alcohol test, as alcohol and drugs may not be related to or linked to the problem. Madam Speaker, it would be more suitable to the motion rather than create a new issue because this is irrelevant. The motion also calls for a psychiatric analysis and regular support with courses. According to Ms. Nina Welsh, a psychologist at Northwood Prison, the government may not be able to provide this service constantly, as she has been on island for 1 year and her role has not been filled for almost 5. This also means that if a person is convicted, the government cannot assure that the appropriate staff is present or provided to provide the service. Ms. Welsh does maintain that any form of psychiatric help is best delivered within the community. She would not recommend this for the Cayman Islands, however, as the healthcare system is not as advanced as, say, the National Health Service to adequately provide this. Madam Speaker, the prison already has a comprehensive course for these offenders, and the psychologist is confident that this is sufficient. Creating the right system requires a large amount of money and time, which is a significant investment. This would be a problem because this particular subject is not considered a major issue currently in the Cayman Islands. Madam Speaker, my next point is to discuss the necessary facilities required to accommodate these offenders. These facilities do not currently exist here in the Cayman Islands. Madam Speaker, the government of the Cayman Islands does not see this crisis as being an urgent problem at this current moment in time. To create a proper facility for these offenders, the government would have to pull funds from other areas in need of financial assistance. Currently, there is a total of 2 convicted sex offenders that are in Northwood Prison. Madam Speaker, presently there is not a substantial amount of convicted prisoners that would require this urgent need for a facility in the Cayman Islands. The indication of having these conditions of mental health checkups, there must be a facility to accommodate this. The other issue I would like to address is mental health of these offenders. According to Ms. Welsh, there is no proven link between mental health and sex offenders. According to dictionary.com, the definition of a sex offender is a person who has been found guilty of one or more sex crimes. This means that anyone who is convicted of this offense is a sex offender. According to mentalhealthamerica.com, sex offenders often do not have a treatable mental illness. This is an unnecessary addition to the proposed bill and should not be included. Madam Speaker, I would like to restate the points I feel are most relevant, and these are: to move to replace the proposed alcohol and drug testing with a ban on the perpetrator from entering a school zone. This is much more relevant to the crime that has been committed. It is not necessary to have a monthly mental health checkup upon the prisoner, again, because this cost is not equal to the benefit, and because there is no proven link between mental health and sex offenders. Lastly, there are no facilities currently available for this, and that the funds that are required to start a project like this are not necessary or are in urgent need at this time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? If no other member wishes to speak, I will ask the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, the first elected member for Georgetown, to exercise her right of reply.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the opposition, I would like to reinstate my thanks to you before closing. Through you, Madam Speaker, I would like to recap what my colleagues here have discussed today. Our motion, which has been debated in this honorable House today, proposes to bring awareness to a section of the Penal Code which serves great purpose in today's world. Madam Speaker, we all know how much technology has advanced, but what we fail to notice are the issues that come with such development. We cannot wait for this to become a problem before we deal with it, Madam Speaker. The key is prevention of both the sentencing and resentencing of such a crime. As high school students, one may not see sending inappropriate photos as a pressing issue. However, it is important that we educate our young people to think otherwise. Moreover, the large majority of inappropriate material is abusive and non-consensual. This, Madam Speaker, is what I urge the government to understand today. The mentality seems to be that if it is on a screen, it's not real. It is very real. I would like to think that those present today would not tolerate any form of abuse. I would like to also touch on a few points that the government has raised today. Firstly, I would like to address the fourth elected member for Georgetown's claim that this is a big investment. Yes, but would you rather spend money now to prevent and protect, or wait for the problem to get out of hand and have to spend more to contain it? This is often the way of the government, it seems. Secondly, I would like to express that while I have enjoyed listening to the Attorney General read out our motion once more, as well as recite definitions to the terms used in the code to which the motion pertains to, the Attorney General has in fact proved my point. You should not have to enlist the help of a dictionary to understand the law. You blame the ignorance of citizens, but why not look to the lack of communicability on behalf of the government? Moreover,
Madam Speaker, a point of order. At what time did someone blame the ignorance of the people? Specifically, sorry, not just...
If you would let me finish, I was not implying that a member, I didn't say quote, I was not implying that a member said this, I was simply starting to give an analogy. Thank you. I will continue. Moreover, the member stated that we shouldn't look to others to write our own law, and this is a quote. I'd like to remind this honorable parliament, while we are in a Commonwealth time, that we are in fact dependent on the UK, and we definitely look to them, being other, when constructing our law. I would also like to touch on what the second elected member for Cayman Brac and Little Cayman said. In our motion, she said that in our motion, we state conditions, I would like to touch on what she said. In our motion, we state conditions under which probation is served. This means that after a person is released from prison, usually well before 15 years, whatever the probation period is granted by the judge will have these conditions attached to them. So how are we extending anything if we are simply adding conditions to the allotted time given by the legal system? Madam Speaker, in closing, I ask the government to look to their consciences and vote keeping in mind basic morals. Thank you.
The question is, be it now therefore resolved that the government considers amending the specified sections of the Penal Code in a manner so that it offers understanding to the general public, as well as introducing a more appropriate and effective incarnation period so that the perpetrator is legally obligated to undergo psychiatric analysis and regular support following various courses in liaison with those made mandatory to convicted sex offenders, and that following the sentence, the perpetrator's probationary period should entail a curfew of 7 o'clock, monthly drug and alcohol testing, as well as monthly mental support checkups for a specific period of time. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those against, no?
No.
The noes have it. Private members, motion number 2 of 2017, amendment to section 228A of the Penal Code, child pornography, has failed.
Madam Speaker, may I have a division, please?
Madam Clerk, please state the division.
Honorable Elia McLaughlin.
No.
Honorable Aaliyah Copeland.
No.
Honorable Judah Ebanks.
No.
Honorable Ashley Gooden.
No.
Honorable Taylor Wood.
No.
Honorable Zaria Linwood.
No.
Honorable Shakur Ebanks.
No.
Miss Khadija Watt.
No.
Miss Antonia Mina.
No.
Miss Ariana Stevenson.
No.
Mr. Isaac Tibbetts.
No.
Honorable Bianca Magoo.
Aye.
Mr. Richard Weber.
Aye.
Miss Caitlin Seymour.
Aye.
Miss Micah Ebanks.
Aye.
Miss Martha Andino.
Aye.
Miss Jacqueline Bonilla Williams.
Aye.
Mr. Carlton Wright.
Aye.
Mr. Marcus Lawrence.
Aye.
The result for the division is 8 ayes and 11 noes. Private members, motion number 2 of 2017, amendment to section 228A of the Penal Code, child pornography, has failed. That concludes the proceeding of this Honorable 10th Youth Parliament. I will now call on the Honorable Premier to move a motion for the adjournment.
Madam Speaker, I wish to move the adjournment of this Honorable 10th Youth Parliament, signed aye. Madam Speaker, before you put the motion to a vote, I would like to express my sincere thanks and the thanks of all members of the government to Ms. Nina Welsh, the current prison psychologist, Ms. Lisa Hill Malice, and Ms. Melissa Rivas from the Department of Community Rehabilitation, Mr. Johan Moxon, former president of the Chamber of Commerce, Ms. Bina Mani, and Mr. Lennon Christian from the Government Information Services for their insight into their respective professions and policies. I would also like to thank the various ministers, MLAs, ex officio members of cabinet, and those employed at the Legislative Assembly for their assistance and for dedicating their time to this youth parliament. They provided invaluable information and assisted greatly in the drafting process of our motion and speeches. Thank you.
The motion is that this Honorable 10th Youth Parliament do stand adjourned, sine die. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. This Honorable 10th Youth Parliament now stands adjourned, sine die.